The Last Trip to Work. Chapter 1, Monday Morning Ritual. The alarm screamed at 6:47 a.m., just like it had every weekday for the past 8 years. Chen slapped the snooze button with the practiced precision of someone who had perfected the art of extracting 9 more minutes of sleep from the universe. But this Monday was different. This Monday, Sarah knew something the alarm clock didn't. She lay in bed, staring at the water stain on her ceiling that looked like a rabbit playing tennis, and whispered to herself, "Today is my last trip to work." The words tasted strange in her mouth, bitter and sweet at the same time, like dark chocolate mixed with coffee grounds. She had been rehearsing this moment for 3 months, ever since Dr. Martinez had looked at her with those careful, practiced eyes and said the words that changed everything. 6 months, maybe 8 if we're lucky. Sarah pulled herself upright, her joints protesting with their usual morning symphony of pops and creaks. At 34, her body already felt like it belonged to someone much older, someone who had lived harder and longer than she ever planned to. The irony wasn't lost on her. Just as she was learning to truly live, time was running out. She shuffled to the kitchen of her studio apartment, stepping over the suitcase she'd packed but hadn't yet had the courage to open. Inside were letters she'd written to people who mattered, gifts for birthdays she'd never see, and a journal filled with all the things she wanted to do but had always postponed for someday. Someday was today. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the small space with the rich aroma that had become her morning meditation. She had exactly 37 minutes before she needed to leave for the subway, 37 minutes before she began the most important commute of her life. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. "Hope you have a wonderful day at work, sweetheart. Don't forget to eat lunch." Sarah smiled, tears already blurring her vision. Her mother didn't know. Nobody knew except Dr. Martinez, and Sarah intended to keep it that way until she was ready. Today wasn't about dying, it was about living completely for the first time. She pulled out her laptop and began typing. "To whoever finds this. My name is Sarah Chen, and I work at Morrison & Associates downtown. Well, I used to work there. Today is Monday, October 15th, and it's my last day on Earth by choice, not by chance. I know how that sounds, but this isn't what you think. 3 months ago, I got some news that changed everything. But instead of making me want to give up, it made me realize I've been giving up every single day for years. I've been sleepwalking through a life I never really chose. So I made a plan. Today, I'm going to take the same route to work I've taken for 8 years, but I'm going to see it with new eyes. I'm going to talk to the homeless man who sits by the subway entrance instead of pretending he's invisible. I'm going to buy flowers from the woman on 42nd Street and actually smell them. I'm going to eat lunch somewhere other than my desk for the first time in, God, I can't remember when. And then I'm going to quit my job and start living the life I was too scared to live before. If you're reading this, it means I succeeded. It means I found the courage to stop existing and start living, even if it's just for a little while. The thing is, I realize that most people are dying slowly every day, in cubicles, in traffic, in relationships that stopped growing, in dreams that got filed away for later. But what if later never comes? What if the real tragedy isn't having 6 months to live, but having 60 years and never really living them? Today is my last trip to work, but it's my first trip to everywhere else. Wish me luck. Sarah. She closed the laptop and looked around her apartment one more time. Everything was exactly as she'd left it Sunday night, but somehow it all looked different now. The dishes in the sink weren't a sign of laziness anymore. They were evidence of her last normal evening. The unmade bed wasn't a failure of adult responsibility. It was the cocoon she'd emerged from as someone new. Sarah walked to her closet and paused. For 8 years, she'd worn variations of the same outfit. Black pants, white or blue blouse, comfortable but professional shoes. The uniform of someone trying to be invisible, trying not to make waves, trying to be perfect enough to deserve the paycheck that paid for the apartment where she stored the life she wasn't really living. Today she pulled out the red dress. She'd bought it 2 years ago for her friend Maya's wedding, but had chickened out at the last minute and worn navy blue instead. The red dress had been hanging in her closet ever since, tags still attached, waiting for a day when she felt brave enough to be seen. Today was that day. Chapter 2. The Red Dress Revolution. The red dress fit differently than Sarah remembered. Not physically. It still hugged her curves in all the right places and fell just below her knees in a way that was professional enough for work but bold enough to turn heads. No, it fit differently in her soul. For the first time in years, Sarah looked in her bathroom mirror and saw someone she recognized. She had been wearing armor for so long, conservative colors, modest cuts, sensible shoes, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to put on clothes that made her feel powerful instead of protected. The red wasn't just fabric. It was a declaration of war against 8 years of making herself smaller. Her reflection smiled back at her, and Sarah realized she couldn't remember the last time that had happened. Usually, her morning mirror check was a quick assessment of damage control. Was her hair acceptable? Did she look tired? Were there any visible signs that she was falling apart? Today, she looked radiant. She applied mascara for the first time in months, not because she felt like she needed it, but because she wanted to. Each stroke felt like painting war paint, preparing for battle against the ordinary. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Jake from accounting. Meeting moved to 10 a.m. Hope you're ready for Peterson's quarterly review presentation. Sarah almost laughed. Peterson's quarterly review had been consuming her evenings and weekends for the past month. She'd built elaborate spreadsheets, crafted PowerPoint presentations with more transitions than a Hollywood movie, and rehearsed her talking points until they felt like incantations. All for a meeting she would never attend. She typed back, "I'm ready for everything." It was 7:15 a.m. In her normal routine, this was when panic would set in. She'd realize she was running late, grab a stale bagel, spill coffee on her blouse, and start her day in a state of low-grade anxiety that would follow her until bedtime. But today, Sarah had built in time for miracles. She made herself scrambled eggs, actual eggs with butter and herbs, not the protein bar she usually consumed while checking emails. She sat at her small dining table, which she typically used as a laptop desk, and ate slowly, tasting each bite. The eggs were perfect. Creamy, seasoned just right, warm and comforting in a way that reminded her of Sunday mornings when she was 8 years old and her biggest worry was whether there would be enough syrup for her pancakes. When had she stopped making herself breakfast? When had eating become just fuel instead of pleasure? At 7:35, Sarah picked up her purse. Not her usual practical black leather bag, but a vintage beaded clutch her grandmother had given her years ago. It was completely impractical for carrying work supplies, but it was beautiful, and today beautiful mattered more than practical. She grabbed her coat, paused at the door, and looked back at her apartment one more time. This morning, she'd been a person who lived here. Tonight, she'd be someone entirely different. The woman who came home would have stories to tell, memories that mattered, and the kind of tired that comes from really living instead of just enduring. The elevator in her building had been broken for 3 weeks, so Sarah walked down 4 flights of stairs, her heels clicking against the concrete in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. With each step, she felt herself shedding layers of who she used to be. 4th floor. Goodbye to the woman who said sorry for taking up space. 3rd floor. Goodbye to the woman who ate lunch alone at her desk every day. 2nd floor. Goodbye to the woman who never spoke up in meetings. 1st floor. Goodbye to the woman who was afraid of being seen. Ground floor. Hello to Sarah. The October morning was crisp, with that particular quality of light that made everything look like it was being photographed for a magazine. The kind of morning that demanded to be noticed, to be breathed in deeply and remembered. Sarah had walked these same 6 blocks to the subway station 2,080 times over the past 8 years. She knew every crack in the sidewalk, every storefront, every tree. She could navigate the route in her sleep, and often felt like she had. But today, everything looked different. The bodega on the corner where she usually grabbed her coffee had a display of fresh flowers outside that she'd never noticed before. Bright orange marigolds, deep purple mums, white roses that looked like they were glowing in the morning sun. The elderly Korean woman who ran the shop was arranging them carefully, creating patterns of color that turned the sidewalk into an art gallery. Sarah had walked past this woman every day for 8 years. They'd exchanged nods, the occasional good morning, the ritual of small bills and coffee cups changing hands. But Sarah had never really seen her. Not her careful attention to beauty, not the way she hummed while she worked, not the small smile she got when she stepped back to admire her arrangements. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her voice sounding braver than she felt. "Those flowers are beautiful. Could I buy some?" The woman looked up, surprised. Sarah realized this was probably the first time in 8 years she'd said something that wasn't about coffee or the weather. "Oh, yes, of course." The woman's face lit up. "You want roses? They're very fresh, came in this morning." "Actually," Sarah said, looking at the display with new eyes, "could I have one of each? I want them all." The woman laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "You having party?" "Something like that," Sarah said, smiling. "I'm celebrating." As the woman wrapped the flowers in brown paper, she chatted about her garden in Korea, about her granddaughter who was starting college, about how the weather was perfect for flowers this time of year. Sarah listened, really listened, and realized she was learning more about life in 10 minutes than she had in months of riding the subway in silence. "You look different today," the woman said as she handed over the bouquet. "Happy different. Red is good color for you." Sarah paid for the flowers and walked away with something more valuable than the blooms in her arms. She was carrying the first real conversation she'd had with a stranger in years, the first moment of genuine human connection in a day that was just beginning. The flowers smelled like possibility. Chapter 3: Underground Revelations. The subway entrance at 86th Street had been Sarah's portal between her real life and her work life for 8 years. Every morning, she'd descend those stairs and transform from a woman with dreams and fears and favorite songs into employee 4847, Sarah Chen, Junior Account Manager, Morrison and Associates. But today, the transformation was different. Today, she was becoming more herself with each step down. The familiar homeless man was in his usual spot by the turnstiles. Sarah had seen him every single day for 8 years, had developed an elaborate system of avoiding eye contact, had perfected the art of walking past without acknowledging his existence. She knew it was wrong, had felt guilty about it every single time, but had convinced herself that she was too busy, too late, too something to stop. Today she stopped. "Good morning," she said, looking directly at him for the first time. He looked up from his cardboard sign, surprised. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and Sarah realized he was younger than she'd thought, maybe in his 50s, with graying hair and a face that had seen too much weather but still held traces of what must have been a kind smile. "Morning," he said cautiously, like he wasn't sure this interaction was really happening. "I'm Sarah," she said, sitting down on the bench next to him. Her red dress and designer flowers looked absurd next to his worn jacket and weathered sign, but somehow that felt right. Contrasts were beautiful. Contrasts were real. "Marcus," he said after a moment. "You okay, miss? You seem different today." Sarah laughed. "Everyone keeps saying that. I think I'm finally becoming myself." Marcus studied her face. "That's either the best thing or the most dangerous thing a person can do. Why can't it be both?" They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the stream of commuters flow past them like a river of purpose. Sarah had been part of that river for so long, she'd forgotten what it looked like from the shore. "You want to know something funny?" Marcus said. "I used to have your job. Well, not exactly your job, but I was one of them." He nodded toward the passing crowd. Suit, briefcase, train schedule memorized down to the minute. Thought I was living the dream. What happened? Life happened. Wife got sick. Insurance didn't cover what it should have. Lost the house trying to pay for treatment. She died anyway. His voice was matter of fact, but Sarah could hear the ocean of pain underneath. Turns out, when you lose everything you thought defined you, you find out who you really are. Sometimes that's a gift. Sometimes it's a curse. Sarah felt something crack open in her chest. I'm sorry. Don't be. Be sorry she died. She was the best person I ever knew. But don't be sorry I lost everything else. Best thing that ever happened to me in a weird way. Made me stop pretending. Pretending what? That any of it mattered. The job, the house, the car, the 401k. All of it was just noise. Distraction from the real stuff. What's the real stuff? Marcus smiled, and Sarah saw what his face must have looked like before life carved stories into it. This. Right now. You sitting here talking to me like I'm human. The way the light hits those flowers you're carrying. The fact that you're wearing a dress the color of courage on a Monday morning. Sarah looked down at her red dress, then back at Marcus. How do you know it's courage? Because scared people wear camouflage. Happy people wear bright colors. You're not scared today, are you? Terrified, Sarah admitted. But not of the things I used to be afraid of. The downtown train arrived with its familiar screech of brakes and hiss of opening doors. For 8 years, this sound had been Sarah's cue to leap up, push through crowds, claim her spot in the metal box that would carry her away from herself for the next 10 hours. Today she sat still. You missing your train, Marcus observed. No, Sarah said, watching the doors close and the train disappear into the tunnel. I think I'm finally catching it. She reached into her vintage beaded purse and pulled out a $20 bill. For coffee, she said, offering it to Marcus. He looked at the money, then at her face. You sure? $20 buys a lot of coffee. I'm sure. But actually... Sarah paused, struck by an idea that felt both crazy and completely right. What if instead of coffee, you came to breakfast with me? There's a diner around the corner. My treat. Marcus stared at her like she just offered to fly him to the moon. You want to have breakfast with me? I want to have breakfast with someone who knows the difference between living and pretending to live. Plus, I have about 6 hours of work I'm not going to do today. And I could use some advice on how to spend them. The next train wouldn't arrive for 12 minutes. In her old life, Sarah would have spent those 12 minutes checking emails, reviewing her presentation notes, mentally rehearsing her day. Today, she spent them walking to Murphy's diner with a man named Marcus, carrying flowers that smelled like freedom and wearing a dress the color of revolution. The hostess at Murphy's diner looked uncertain when they walked in. Sarah in her red dress and beaded purse, Marcus in his worn jacket and weathered face. But something in Sarah's expression must have communicated that she was exactly where she belonged, because the hostess smiled and led them to a booth by the window. I haven't been in a restaurant in, 2 years maybe, Marcus said, looking around like he was seeing magic. Forgot how nice it is to eat somewhere with real plates. Sarah realized she hadn't been in a restaurant for breakfast in longer than that. She'd been grabbing coffee and protein bars, eating at her desk while scrolling through emails, treating food like fuel instead of pleasure. When had she started living like that? When had efficiency become more important than experience? Order whatever you want, she said, meaning it completely. Marcus looked at the menu like it was written in a foreign language. You sure about this? You don't know me. I could be anyone. You could be, Sarah agreed. But you're not. You're Marcus. You know the difference between noise and music. You understand that courage looks like a red dress on a Monday morning. And you're the first person in years who's made me feel like I'm having a real conversation. They ordered. Marcus got the lumberjack special, Sarah got French toast with strawberries, and spent the next hour talking about everything and nothing. Marcus told her about the woman he'd married, about the job he'd lost, about the lessons you learn when life strips away everything except what actually matters. Sarah told him about her diagnosis, about her plan for the day, about how she'd been sleepwalking through her life until 3 months ago. "So you're not really going to work today?" Marcus asked, cutting into his pancakes. "Oh, I'm going to work. I'm going to do the most important work of my life. I'm going to quit my job, tell my boss what I really think, clean out my desk, and walk out the door into whatever comes next." That's either the bravest thing I've ever heard or the craziest. "Why can't it be both?" Marcus laughed, a rich, warm sound that filled the diner and made other customers turn and smile without knowing why. "You know what? You're right. The best things in life are both." At 9:30 a.m., Sarah paid the check and stood up to leave. She'd been in Murphy's diner for an hour and a half, and it had been the most educational 90 minutes of her adult life. "Marcus," she said, pulling a business card from her purse and writing on the back, "this is my address. In my apartment, there's a suitcase by the door. Inside are letters I wrote to people and some money I was saving for things that don't matter anymore. Would you deliver the letters for me?" Marcus took the card, his eyes serious. "You sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." "But Marcus, don't deliver them until tomorrow. I need today to be about living, not about saying goodbye. What if I don't see you tomorrow?" Sarah smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached all the way to her eyes. "Then you'll know I kept living, and that's the best ending any story can have." She walked out of Murphy's diner into the October sunshine, her flowers bright against her red dress, her vintage purse containing the keys to a life she was finally ready to unlock. Behind her, Marcus watched through the window, and Sarah could feel his blessing following her down the street like a benediction. It was 9:45 a.m., and Sarah Chen was 45 minutes late for the most important day of work in her life. Chapter 4: The Walk of Recognition. Sarah had taken the subway to work every day for 8 years. Today, she decided to walk the 42 blocks from Murphy's Diner to Morrison & Associates. In her sensible work shoes, the journey would have been impossible. In her red heels, it was an adventure. The city looked different at street level, at the pace of footsteps instead of the blur of tunnel windows. Sarah had forgotten that New York wasn't just a series of subway stops connected by underground tunnels. It was a living organism, breathing with the rhythm of 8 million stories happening all at once. She walked through neighborhoods she'd never noticed before, past buildings that had been watching the city change for over a century, past store windows that displayed dreams and desires and desperate attempts at beauty. Every block was a chapter in a book she'd been too busy to read. On 72nd Street, she passed a small bookstore she'd never seen despite 8 years of subway commuting. The window display featured novels about adventure, about people who left everything behind to discover who they really were, about love that changed everything and courage that cost everything. Sarah stopped and bought 3 books, not because she had time to read them, but because the act of buying books felt like making a promise to a future version of herself. On 68th Street, she stopped at a flower shop and added white orchids to her bouquet. The florist, a man with soil under his fingernails and sunlight in his smile, wrapped them with the same care Sarah imagined he'd used to handle butterfly wings. "Special occasion?" he asked. "The most special," Sarah said. "I'm becoming who I was supposed to be." On 63rd Street, she bought coffee from a cart run by a woman who drew hearts in the foam and asked about her day like the answer really mattered. Sarah found herself telling the truth, that she was walking to work to quit her job, that she was wearing red because she'd been invisible too long, that she had maybe 6 months to live and intended to make them count. "Good for you, honey," the woman said, refusing payment for the coffee. "Life's too short to spend it making other people's dreams come true." By the time Sarah reached 57th Street, her feet hurt and her arms ached from carrying flowers and books, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She'd had more genuine conversations in the past 4 hours than she'd had in the past 4 months. She'd remembered what it felt like to be curious about the world instead of just enduring it. At 52nd Street, she called Maya. Maya had been her college roommate, her maid of honor when she married David, her emergency contact for everything that mattered. They drifted apart over the past few years, not from any fight or falling out, but from that slow erosion that happens when life gets busy and friendship gets relegated to birthday texts and holiday cards. Sarah? Oh my God, hi. Is everything okay? You never call during work hours. Everything's perfect, Sarah said, meaning it for the first time in years. Maya, do you remember senior year when we stayed up all night talking about what we wanted our lives to look like? Of course. You wanted to travel, right? Maybe teach English abroad. I wanted to open a gallery, find someone who made me laugh every day. We were going to be brave and adventurous and… Oh, Maya's voice softened. Sarah, what's going on? I'm finally doing it. I'm being brave. I'm walking to work right now to quit my job. What? Sarah, what happened? Are you okay? I'm better than okay. I'm awake. Maya, when's the last time you painted? There was a long pause. I don't know. Work's been crazy, and David's been traveling so much, and… Paint something today. Paint something that makes you happy. Promise me. Sarah, you're scaring me. What's really going on? I'm living, Maya. For the first time in years, I'm actually living. I have to go. I have 30 more blocks to walk and a life to start. But promise me you'll paint something today. Okay. Promise. But Sarah, call me tonight? Please. I'll call you when I have stories worth telling. Sarah hung up and kept walking. Each block was bringing her closer to Morrison and Associates, but also further from the person she used to be. By the time she reached 47th Street, she felt like she'd traveled not just through the city, but through time, back to the person she'd been before fear convinced her to settle for safe. At 45th Street, she stopped outside a small gallery. In the window was a painting of a woman in a red dress, standing at the edge of a cliff, her arms spread wide like she was about to fly. Sarah stared at it for a long time, seeing her own reflection superimposed over the image. The gallery owner, a man with kind eyes and paint-stained fingers, came outside to water the plants by his door. Beautiful piece, Sarah said, nodding toward the painting. One of my favorites, he said. The artist called it the moment before everything changes. She painted it the day she decided to leave her corporate job and become a full-time artist. Did she ever regret it? The man smiled. She's been supporting herself with her art for 15 years now. She says the only thing she regrets is waiting so long to jump. Sarah looked at the painting one more time, then at her reflection in the gallery window. The woman in red looking back at her was a stranger, confident, radiant, alive. She was the woman Sarah had always been underneath the armor of sensible clothes and safe choices. How much? She asked. I'm sorry. The painting. How much does it cost? The gallery owner looked surprised. It's $1,200. Sarah opened her vintage beaded purse and pulled out her credit card. In her old life, spending $1,200 on a painting would have caused weeks of anxiety, budget recalculations, guilt about frivolous purchases. Today it felt like buying back her soul. I'll take it, she said, but I can't pick it up until later. I have some work to finish first. As Sarah signed the papers for the painting, she realized she was buying more than art. She was buying a reminder, a talisman, a promise to herself that this feeling, this aliveness, was worth whatever it cost. She walked the last 5 blocks to Morrison and Associates carrying flowers, books, coffee that tasted like kindness, and the receipt for a painting that showed her who she was becoming. Her feet hurt, her arms ached, and her heart felt like it might burst from joy. At 11:47 a.m., Sarah Chen walked into the lobby of Morrison and Associates for the last time. She was 3 hours and 47 minutes late for the most important meeting of her career, and she had never been more punctual in her life. Chapter 5: The Elevator to Everywhere. The lobby of Morrison & Associates was exactly as Sarah remembered it from that morning: marble floors that echoed footsteps like reproaches, abstract art that said nothing beautifully, and the persistent smell of industrial-strength air freshener trying to mask the scent of human desperation. But today Sarah saw it differently. Today it looked like a museum exhibit. Corporate life, early 21st century. How humans convinced themselves that fluorescent lighting and ergonomic chairs were worth trading their dreams. The security guard, Harold, looked up from his newspaper with surprise. Harold had been waving Sarah through the lobby every morning for 8 years, but today he actually saw her. "Miss Chen, you look different today. That's a beautiful dress." Sarah realized this was the first time Harold had ever complimented her appearance. The first time he'd really looked at her as anything other than employee 4847 with appropriate clearance. "Thank you, Harold. You know what? You have kind eyes. I've been walking past you for 8 years, and I never noticed how kind your eyes are." Harold smiled, really smiled, not just the professional acknowledgement he usually gave. "Thank you, miss. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in months." Sarah looked at him, really looked, and saw a man in his 60s with laugh lines around those kind eyes, with a wedding ring worn smooth by decades of love, with a small photo of grandchildren taped to his security desk. A whole human being with his own stories and dreams and fears, reduced to a uniform and a name tag by people too busy to see him. "Harold, do you have grandchildren?" His face lit up like a Christmas tree. "3 of them. Sophie's 7, Marcus is 5, and little Emma just turned 2. Smartest kids you ever saw." "Tell me about them," Sarah said, setting down her flowers and leaning against his desk. For the next 10 minutes, Harold told her about Sophie's soccer games, Marcus's obsession with dinosaurs, and Emma's first words. He pulled out his phone and showed her pictures, his voice growing warmer with each story. Sarah listened with the full attention she'd been saving for work presentations about quarterly projections, and realized she was learning more about joy in 10 minutes than she'd experienced in months. "Harold," she said when he finished, "you're one of the richest people I've ever met." He looked confused. "Rich? Miss Chen, I make $12 an hour. You have people who light up when you walk in the room. You have stories that make you smile just telling them. You have love that's so big it spills over onto strangers in lobbies. That's not rich, that's wealthy." Harold's eyes filled with tears, and Sarah realized she might have just given him something no paycheck ever could. The recognition that his life mattered, that his love was valuable, that he was more than his job title. The elevator arrived with its familiar ding. Sarah picked up her flowers and books, gave Harold one more smile, and stepped inside. As the doors closed, she heard him pick up his phone and dial a number. "Sophie? It's Grandpa. I know you're in school, honey, but I just wanted to tell you I love you." The elevator rose through the floors of Sarah's professional life. Second floor, Human Resources, where she'd sign papers that promised 40 hours a week in exchange for health insurance and 2 weeks of vacation. Third floor, Marketing, where enthusiasm went to die in focus groups and demographic studies. Fourth floor, Sales, where human connections were reduced to conversion rates and quarterly targets. Eighth floor, her floor. The doors opened and Sarah stepped into the cube farm where she'd spent 40 hours a week for 8 years, watching her life tick by in increments of productivity metrics and performance reviews. The office looked smaller than she remembered. Had the ceilings always been this low? Had the fluorescent lights always hummed with that slight electrical buzz that made everything feel slightly unreal? Had the air always tasted recycled and stale? Her co-workers looked up from their computers as she walked past, and Sarah could see the confusion in their faces. This wasn't the Sarah they knew. The Sarah who wore camouflage colors and kept her head down and apologized for existing. This was someone new, someone bright and confident and impossibly dangerously alive. "Sarah," Jake from accounting called out. "You missed the Peterson meeting." He was furious. Where have you been? Sarah stopped walking and turned to face Jake. Really face him like a person instead of a coworker. Jake was 28, fresh out of business school, still young enough to believe that if he just worked hard enough and followed enough rules, success would eventually arrive to rescue him from the growing suspicion that he was wasting his life. I've been living, Jake. For the first time in years, I've been actually living. But the Peterson presentation, you worked on it for weeks. He wants to see you in his office immediately. Sarah looked at Jake's worried face, at the genuine concern there, and felt a wave of compassion for the person she used to be. The person who would have panicked at missing a meeting, who would have spent the rest of the day crafting apologies and excuses, who would have stayed late to make up for being human. Jake, she said gently, when's the last time you did something just because it made you happy? He looked at her like she'd asked when he'd last been to Mars. What do you mean? I mean something that had nothing to do with work or advancing your career or impressing anyone. Something that fed your soul instead of your resume. Jake thought for a moment, his face growing troubled. I don't know. College, maybe? I used to play guitar. What happened to your guitar? It's in my closet. No time for hobbies anymore, you know? I'm trying to make partner before I'm 30. Sarah looked at this young man who'd already learned to bury his music for the promise of a corner office, and she wanted to shake him, to grab him by the shoulders and tell him that partners didn't get to take their titles with them when they died, but the echo of a guitar could follow you into eternity. Instead, she said, "Play something tonight, Jake. Just one song. For me." Sarah, are you feeling okay? You seem different. I'm perfect, she said, meaning it completely. I'm finally absolutely perfect. Sarah walked to her cubicle, past the motivational posters about synergy and excellence, past the potted plant someone had optimistically placed by the window. It had died months ago, but no one had bothered to remove it, past 8 years of accumulated resignation. Her desk looked like an archaeological dig of a life unlived. Stacks of reports she'd written that no one would remember in a year. Printouts of emails about meetings to plan other meetings. A coffee mug that said, "World's okayest employee." A joke gift from the office Christmas party that had stopped being funny sometime around year 3. Sarah sat down in her ergonomic chair, turned on her computer for the last time, and began to write.